everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of instructional design.
Ooh, exciting.
It is, but not the part you usually see. Like, we're not talking about the fancy courses or the online modules, all the bells and whistles. Instead, we're going behind the scenes to uncover the secret weapon of training that actually works.
The secret weapon?
I know, right? It's called front-end analysis.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So think of it this way.
Okay.
Imagine you're building a house.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just start slapping on bricks without a blueprint, right?
With no blueprint, no how.
Exactly. Front-end analysis is kind of like that blueprint, but for learning.
That makes sense.
But why is it so important? Why bother with all this planning? Can't we just, figure it out as we go along?
You could, but it's going to cost you.
What do you mean?
Well, get this. Companies waste an average of $1,200 per employee on training that totally misses the mark.
Oh, wow.
That's like building a house with crooked walls and leaky plumbing.
Not a good look.
Nope. Front-end analysis is about making sure that every dollar you spend on training actually leads to better results.
Okay, so front-end analysis suddenly sounds a lot more interesting.
I told you.
So how does it actually work? What are the steps involved?
So it all starts with understanding the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just mean like the symptoms.
Symptoms?
Like the low sales numbers or people complaining about a new software system. We need to go deeper and figure out the root cause.
So it's like detective work almost.
Exactly. You got to gather clues to figure out what's really going on.
I like it.
So imagine for a second that you're tasked with improving customer satisfaction at a tech support company.
Okay.
Let's call them Global Tech.
Global Tech, right.
And let's say they're drowning in complaints, wait times are through the roof, and everybody's frustrated. Where would you even begin?
Well, I guess I'd start by talking to people.
Good.
Like the support staff, the managers, even some customers, just to get different perspectives.
You're on the right track. Gathering information from different sources is key.
Okay.
So you could do interviews, run focus groups, even look at existing data like performance reviews or customer feedback surveys.
So many options.
That's right. But it's not just about collecting a bunch of random information.
So what are we looking for in all this data?
We're looking for patterns, those recurring themes or insights that tell a story.
Okay.
So in Global Tech's case, they uncovered a couple of key issues. First, their support staff had totally different levels of expertise. Some were like tech wizards, and others could barely turn on a computer.
That's a problem.
It is.
Yeah.
And that led to inconsistent responses, which frustrated customers.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
And then another thing they found. There was no centralized knowledge base.
What do you mean?
So basically, the support staff were constantly reinventing the wheel, giving different answers to the same questions over and over again.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and on top of that, their training was outdated.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. But here's where front-end analysis gets really powerful.
Okay.
Global Tech used those insights to create targeted solutions.
Like what?
Well, first, they created a tiered support system. So complex cases could be escalated to the more experienced staff.
So the right person for the right problem.
Exactly. Then they developed a structured training program with simulations for those tricky situations.
Cool.
And they created a searchable online knowledge base that was integrated with their ticketing system.
That makes a lot of sense, but did it actually work?
It did. Their average response time decreased by a whopping 40%.
Oh.
And their first call resolution rate jumped from 50% to 80%.
That's incredible. So this isn't just about instructional design. It's about using data to make things better.
Exactly. And the best part is that front-end analysis isn't just for big companies.
Really?
It can be applied to any situation where you're trying to improve performance, whether you're leading a team, launching a new product, or even just learning a new skill yourself.
My mind is blown. So what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember from this part of our deep dive?
Before you jump into solutions, take the time to understand the problem. Front-end analysis may not be glamorous, but it's the key to creating training that actually gets results.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And we'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll dive into the world of data collection. Get ready to put on your detective hats.
All right, so we're back and ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of data collection. In part 1, we talked about why front-end analysis is so important, but now I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed. Where do we even begin with all this data gathering?
I hear you. It can definitely feel like a lot. But don't worry, we don't have to boil the ocean here.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So how do we make this manageable?
Well, think of it like choosing the right tools from your detective kit.
Okay, I like that analogy.
You wouldn't use a magnifying glass to dust for fingerprints, right?
No, that'd be silly.
Exactly. So let's start with one of the most valuable tools in our kit, stakeholder interviews.
Stakeholder interviews. Okay, it's like those one-on-one interrogations you see in detective movies.
Ooh, getting intense.
We're talking to the key players, the people who have a vested interest in the training's success.
So who are we talking to exactly?
Well, think managers, subject matter experts, even the learners themselves.
So we're getting those firsthand accounts, the insider perspectives.
Exactly. We want to understand their goals, their challenges, their perceptions of the problem.
So what kind of questions are we asking these stakeholders?
Well, you might ask a manager something like, what are the biggest skill gaps you see in your team? Or what are your expectations for this training?
Okay, so really digging into their specific needs and expectations.
Exactly. It's all about gathering those golden nuggets of information.
I bet those conversations can be super insightful.
They really are. But sometimes you want to hear from a group of people, see how their ideas bounce off each other.
Oh yeah, like a brainstorming session.
Exactly. That's where focus groups come in.
Focus groups, all right.
Instead of a one-on-one, we're gathering a small group of stakeholders or potential learners
Yeah.
and facilitating a discussion.
So we can see what common themes emerge, what solutions they propose.
Right. But sometimes you need more than just opinions.
You mean like hard data?
Exactly. And that's where things like surveys come in.
Surveys, I've taken a few of those.
They can be super helpful. We can also look at performance data, even learning management system analytics.
So like completion rates for online courses or scores on assessments?
You got it. It's like having a numerical fingerprint of learner behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. But all this data gathering sounds like a lot of work, especially if you're already strapped for time.
I hear you. But the good news is we don't always have to start from scratch.
Really?
Nope. We can often find valuable insights by simply looking at what already exists.
Oh, you mean like existing documents and records?
Exactly. Think training materials, performance reviews, even internal memos.
So it's like being a historian, almost piecing together the past to understand the present.
I love that. And speaking of history, have you ever noticed how we often repeat the same mistakes over and over again?
Ugh, yes. Especially when it comes to training.
Well, one way to avoid that is to do a thorough review of past training initiatives.
So we can see what worked, what didn't, and why?
Exactly. We can learn from those past experiences and make sure we're not making the same mistakes again.
That's a great point. But let's get back to data collection for a sec. We've talked about interviews, focus groups, surveys, and document analysis. What other tools do we have in our detective kit?
Well, another powerful technique is observation.
Observation.
It's like those stakeouts you see in detective shows.
Okay, I'm picturing binoculars and trench coats.
We're immersing ourselves in the work environment, watching how people actually perform their tasks.
So we can see where the bottlenecks are, where the inefficiencies lie.
Exactly. And we can also uncover those informal knowledge-sharing practices that often go unnoticed.
Like those little tips and tricks that people share with each other but never get documented.
You got it. And speaking of documentation, another important source of data is the Learning Management System, or LMS.
Ah, the LMS. That's where a lot of training happens these days.
Exactly. And it's a goldmine of data. We can track completion rates, time spent on modules, even quiz scores.
So we can see how learners are actually interacting with the training materials.
Right. But it's not just about the training itself. We also need to look at the bigger picture.
You mean how training impacts overall organizational performance?
Exactly. That's where KPIs, or key performance indicators, come in.
KPIs? Okay, I've heard that term before.
They're the metrics that tell us how well the organization is doing as a whole.
So things like customer satisfaction scores, sales figures, employee retention rates.
You got it. By connecting training to those KPIs, we can demonstrate its value and impact.
So it's not just about training for training's sake, it's about driving real business results.
Exactly. But I know what you're thinking. All this data sounds great, but how do we actually make sense of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It feels like we could easily get lost in the weeds here.
Don't worry, we'll cover that in part 3, where we'll dive into the exciting world of data analysis.
I can't wait. It sounds like we're going to be putting on our data scientist hats.
You got it. We'll be uncovering those hitting patterns and turning those insights into actionable recommendations.
Sounds like a plan. I'm ready to crack the case.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time to put on our analytical hats and finally make sense of all this data we've been gathering.
It's like we've spent the last two parts of this deep dive collecting all these pieces of a giant puzzle. Now we finally get to start putting it all together.
I love that analogy. So where do we even begin? We have all these notes, charts, diagrams.
It can be a bit overwhelming, but don't worry. A good place to start is to look for those recurring themes, those common threads that keep popping up in the data.
Okay, so like in our global tech example from part one,
Yeah.
we kept hearing about inconsistent responses, a lack of a knowledge base, outdated training material.
Exactly. When you start seeing those same issues over and over again, it's a pretty clear sign that there's a deeper systemic problem that needs to be addressed. So it's not just about fixing those isolated incidents, it's about getting to the root of the problem and coming up with a more holistic solution.
You got it. And that's what makes front-end analysis so powerful. It helps us see the big picture, connect those seemingly unrelated dots, and really understand what's going on.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. So let's say we've identified those key patterns. What's the next step? How do we turn those insights into action?
Well, it's kind of like we've diagnosed the patient. Now we need to figure out the best course of treatment.
Treatment? Okay, I like that analogy.
So we take those key findings from our analysis, and we translate them into specific recommendations for the training.
So in Global Tech's case, we might recommend things like developing a tiered support system, creating a centralized knowledge base, and revamping their training program.
Exactly. And those recommendations need to be as specific as possible. It's not enough to just say, improve training. We need to provide clear, actionable steps like incorporate microlearning modules or develop virtual reality simulations.
Okay, those sound way more engaging than the boring old training sessions I'm used to.
And that's the whole point. Front-end analysis helps us create learning experiences that are actually effective and enjoyable.
This is all great, but I'm thinking about those organizations that might not have a lot of resources.
Ah, yes, the budget and time constraints.
Exactly. How can we make front-end analysis work in those situations?
Well, the key is to be strategic. You don't have to use every single data collection method. Focus on the ones that will give you the most valuable insights for your specific situation.
So like maybe instead of a huge company-wide survey, we could start with a few targeted interviews or focus groups.
Exactly. Or maybe you can leverage some existing data that's already available, like performance reviews or customer feedback.
So it's all about working smarter, not harder.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But okay, let's say we've done all this amazing analysis and come up with these brilliant recommendations. How do we make sure they actually get implemented?
That's a great question. It's not enough to just present a report and hope for the best. We need to become champions for our findings.
Champions.
Yeah, we need to clearly communicate the value of front-end analysis to the decision makers and explain how our recommendations can lead to real positive change.
So it's about being persuasive, building buy-in, and maybe even providing support during the implementation process.
Exactly. It's about being a change agent, not just a data analyst.
Wow, this has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about front-end analysis and how it can transform the way we approach learning and development.
And remember, front-end analysis isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process, a continuous cycle of gathering data, analyzing insights, and refining our strategies.
So it's like we're constantly learning and evolving right along with the world of work.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive, and we hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, the next time you're faced with a learning challenge, think like a detective. Gather your data, analyze the clues, and you'll be amazed at what you can discover. Until next time, happy learning.